Actually, I assume that you all have much more important things to be doing, but for the past few days, all I've been doing is binge watching Indian matchmaking on Netflix. For the uninitiated, it's a reality TV show about Indian arranged marriages, sort of like the Kardashians, but replace exorbitant wealth in dollars with exorbitant wealth in rupees. The point is, from reality TV to new specials with all Indian casts, in America, we're collectively witnessing unprecedented levels of South Asian visibility and representation in film and media. However, critics have astutely pointed out that these representations often conveniently gloss over the current political moment in India. The reality of caste discrimination, rampant Islamophobia, the Modi government's recent undemocratic policies, and brutal mob violence against religious minorities. Like inconvenient dust, authoritarianism has effectively been swept underneath the carpet. Perhaps it's true that we can't expect reality TV and media to be responsible for single-handedly taking on global human rights violations. But then I ask, whose responsibility is it? Perhaps pop culture is just meant to be an escape from reality, but then we all have to ask, when will we face reality? Reality is that the secular, democratic, and constitutional values of the world's so-called largest democracy are at risk, and those committed to human rights have a responsibility to take action. Everyone on this call is positioned in some way to leverage their unique knowledge and networks in defense of the millions of Dalits, Muslims, Christians, Adivasis, Bahujan folk, student activists, and women whose lives are at risk in India as we speak. I was born in Ahmedabad, India, and I grew up here in America. I'm an Indian, an American citizen, a practicing Hindu, and as you probably discerned from the pop culture references, a college student. Don't worry, I'm done with those. But the interaction of these identities gives me the ability to speak about my country of origin without fear of retribution to my government, the American government, in hopes of swift and decisive action. I'm here today because the secular fabric of the country I love is at stake, and as a taxpayer and citizen, I hope that my government will be a part of the solution. I mention specifically the privilege to speak without retribution because the Indian government has used not only the pandemic, but the past few years to continue to arrest its critics. It has cracked down on student activists and protesters, including Akhil Gogoi, Safura Zargar, and Dr. Kafil Khan, many of whom remain imprisoned in deadly conditions during a global pandemic. My peers in India are being jailed for brave words that I can only hope to echo. And those who are most directly affected are forcibly silenced. It is all the more important that those with the privilege to speak recognize their obligation to do so. That's why I implore all of you to take the Religious Freedom Report by the State Department very seriously. Reports like this are powerful. They can arm us with the truth while also legitimizing the same arguments that Indian and Indian American organizers have been making for years. But it's also often easy to read the statistics appearing on paper, or in this case, your screens, and forget the human faces behind them. Tragedy is often difficult and painful to internalize. The State Department report tells us, quote, that there were 181 hate crimes in the first half of 2019. It does not tell us about Brevin and his wife, a couple whose home was destroyed by a mob of 300 after they complained about the local temple refusing to host their wedding on the basis of their caste. The report tells us that the government deployed police and cut internet services in Jammu and Kashmir. It does not tell us about how Srinagar airport became the site of a massive crowd of desperate mothers and fathers waiting to be reunited with children that they hadn't been able to contact for months on end. The report tells us that the government sometimes failed to prevent mob attacks on religious minorities. It does not tell us that about how over 200 people out of the 200 people injured or killed in the Delhi violence, one was an 85-year-old Muslim woman who was too frail to flee her burning home when it was set on fire by the mob. History has shown us the ugly faces of these warning signs before. Government officials referring to minorities as termites, the state constructing massive detention camps, and the normalization of mob lynchings. The potential human cost of ignoring these signs, as well as the lessons we have learned from history, should be enough to keep anyone up at night. To quote the late Representative John Lewis, whose words reverberate across time and location, democracy cannot thrive where power remains unchecked and justice is reserved for a select few. Peace cannot exist where justice is not served. As stakeholders in America, a global superpower and self-proclaimed protector of democracy, we can arm ourselves with the facts in this report in order to make decisions that promote the universal pursuit of justice and peace. There are many reasons that Americans should care about what is happening in India, from the increased immigration numbers that we'll see caused by regional instability to the very real diplomatic obligation to hold our allies accountable to the interests of the over 5.6 million South Asian American voters in this country. But above all is the humanitarian obligation to stand behind the brave academics, activists, students, and working class Indians leading the resistance against Hindu fascism. And I want to make very clear here that Hindutva, or Hindu nationalism, is a violent right-wing political ideology currently espoused by multiple members of India's leading party. Hindutva is not Hinduism, a faith practiced by billions. Students Against Hindutva Ideology, the organization I founded, is an interfaith, inter-university, progressive student organization focused on changing behaviors in the South Asian diaspora in concert with the pro-democracy struggle against Hindutva on the subcontinent. Thankfully, the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF, has released a 2020 report that my colleagues have mentioned, with actionable recommendations for the US government and Congress. First, we can all work towards designating India as a country of particular concern for engaging in egregious religious freedom violations as defined by the International Religious Freedom Act. But the government should also consider targeted sanctions on Indian government agencies and officials responsible for violations of religious freedom by freezing those individuals' assets or barring their entry into the United States. In fact, in 2004, Narendra Modi, the current Prime Minister of India, a visa was revoked for his complicity in the 2002 Gujarat riots. There's no reason that today, in the face of extensive documentation and proof of state-sanctioned violence, through reports like the ones we are discussing, the same mechanisms cannot or should not be used. Additionally, policy stakeholders should prioritize building real relationships with religious communities and local officials, especially in regions impacted by religiously motivated violence. I believe that sustainable change must start from the bottom up, but there's no reason that institutions can't facilitate it. Congress, in particular, can and should continue to hold hearings like this, highlighting religious freedom conditions in India. We are in a moment of such global uncertainty and change, but I believe that this moment calls and creates the opportunity for fearless and just leadership. Releases such as the State Department and USCIRF report go a long way in informing and guiding vital dialogue on the US-India relationship. Ideally, this dialogue can lay the groundwork for creative and empathetic action in defense of human rights. Whether November results in a Trump or Biden administration, we must continue to ask ourselves the difficult questions. Here are some of those. Why aren't journalists allowed to see the situation on the ground in Kashmir? Why hasn't a congressional delegation visited Uttar Pradesh to see the violence themselves? Why are American officials avoiding formal condemnation of the extensively documented rights violations in India? Why are resolutions condemning the treatment of India's minorities yet to pass through the House? And what can we all do to not only individually create the changes that we wish to see, but also fundamentally shift the dialogue in America regarding India? It is particularly important that the Hindu nationalist lobby in America does not succeed at suppressing these questions. It's particularly important that we all continue to stay informed about the motives and backgrounds of key stakeholders, and engage with the multiple organizations that are holding this briefing is a great way to do exactly that. You can call me young and naive, but I do believe that the arc of history bends towards justice. I have so much respect for all of you, and I can't imagine what it would be like to hear about the world's problems, from COVID-19 to climate change, day in and day out. Before college, I actually spent 4 years doing congressional debate, and I really thought I had gotten the job down until I found out about rent prices in DC. But it's already a bit surreal to speak here, but what really strikes me most is the difference between high school mock debate and the real world stakes. Policymakers, NGO stakeholders, and elected officials have the power to make real change. That power and privilege is such a unique gift. I hope that you don't hesitate to use that power. I hope you don't hold back simply because the lives at stake are across an ocean. I hope that we can all move forward with compassion, empathy, and the resolve to prioritize human life in the face of difficult decisions. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for all of your work.